Welcome to Mishna study, Masachet Terumot, Perek Bet Mishna Aleph. Over here in this Perek, we're going to start to speak about not tangible things that we were able to discuss before, like separating wine and covering grapes and oil and covering olives and vice versa. Over here, we're going to speak about a little bit more of the intangible. Are you allowed to separate something that's pure to cover something that's impure? You have pure olives and you have impure olives. Are you allowed to go ahead and separate from your pure olives and cover the impure? And that's what we're going to discuss in our Mishnah. So the Mishnah opens up, En tormin minat tahor ala tameh. You're not allowed to separate from the tahor and cover the tameh, something from pure to cover the impure. V'im taram terumato teruma. And if he did so, the teruma counts. Now Harambam over here, interestingly enough, he brings the reason, Amar Hashem et mikdesho mimenu tol min hamekudash shebo. Right? Because the pasuk says it mikdesho mimenu, you have to take from the kadosh, take from the sanctified. Now it's a little unclear how this gives reason to shed light on our Mishnah. If you look in the Hibur, in the Mishneh Torah, when he brings down this limud, he actually says the chatahila, you are allowed to separate tirumat maaser to cover an item, from tahor to cover tameh. But when it comes to our Mishnah, where it's speaking about regular tirumah, you're not supposed to, go ahead, as Mishnah says, use the tahor to cover the tameh. If he does so, it does count b'di'avad. Now, be'emet, truthfully, and every time it says be'emet, halacha leMoshe miSinai, you are allowed to do it in certain cases, and that is when ha'igul shel devela. Let's say you have a fig cake, right? So you have figs, right, dried figs that were packed together, formed in almost like a cake-shaped form. Shnitma miksato, part of it was tameh. Now, just because one of those figs became tameh, it doesn't necessarily mean that whole fig cake became tameh, because we look at it as a separate entity, they're separate figs. So now you didn't separate teruma from this. Are you allowed to go ahead and separate teruma from one of the tahor figs and cover the tameh ones? So tormi mina tahor sheyeshbo ala tameh sheyeshbo. You're allowed to go ahead and separate from the tahor and cover the tameh. V'chad agudah shel yarak, not just if it's something that's packed together. Also, if you have an agudah shel yarak, you have a bundle, right? You have a bundle of vegetables that were tied together. Right, so they're a little bit more separate from each other. Even so, you're allowed to go ahead and separate from the tahor and cover the tameh. Also, if you have a pile, it's not even tied together, you're allowed to go ahead and separate from the tahor and cover the tameh. Right, the only time you're not allowed to do it, as we opened up in our Mishnah, is if it's two separate entities altogether. Right, you have a jar of a basket of olives here and a basket of olives there. You can't go ahead and separate from the tahor and cover the tameh. Let's say you had two fig cakes, two bunches, bunches of vegetables. Two piles. Right, one tahor, one's tameh. Lo yitrom mizeh. Now let it go ahead and separate from one to the next. Right, as we said, right, that you're not allowed to go ahead and do so. By the way, Bartunara points out, and other Mefarshim want to explain that you're not supposed to do so because we know when you're supposed to separate teruma, you're supposed to put them together to separate. And we don't want to go ahead and cause one of the foods to become tameh. Let's say one's tahor and one's tameh. You put them together, right? You may go ahead and make the other one tameh. So it's a gezerah that you don't go ahead and do that. Harambam didn't mention it over here in our Mishnah, but it sounds like a very valid reason. Rabbi Eliezer argues on everything that we said in the Mishnah so far and says, Turmi minat tahor ala tameh. Right, on principle, you're allowed to go ahead and separate teruma from the tahor and cover the tameh. Halacha, though, is not like Rabbi Eliezer.